Welcome to We Make Children's Books, the podcast that takes you through the imaginative minds of children's book authors and artists. I'm your host, Barney Smith of Storycomic.com, and we're excited to have with us the highly talented and internationally acclaimed author and designer, C.E. Simpson. They are here to discuss their latest Choose Your Own Adventure book, Brooklyn Mermaid.
Hi.
How are you doing?
I'm very well, thank you. How are you?
I'm doing well. So as we're talking before we went live, you just moved into your new apartment. So
you are my inaugural Zoom. So I'm very honored for this to be the first one. I'm really excited. I'm starting it off right in this new place for sure.
So we were able to connect through the Choose Your Own Adventure folks that are local to Vermont, where I am as well. So it was really exciting to connect with them. And they are, and we just talked about the fact that you're here to also talk about your latest Choose Your Own Adventure book, The Brooklyn Mermaid, correct? Mm-hmm. No, it's true that this is loosely based off of, it's like sequel to Journey Under the Sea?
Yes.
Okay.
Journey Under the Sea was one of my favorite Choose Your Own Adventure books that I read when I started getting into branching narrative and interactive narratives. And so when I was approached by Chooseco to write a book called Brooklyn Mermaid, because they give you the titles before you start writing the book, I immediately thought of Journey Under the Sea, reread it, and kind of made the decision on my own, hoping that Chooseco would want me to write a very loose sequel to it. Journey Under the Sea is a really classic Choose Your Own Adventure book by R.A. Montgomery. So it's one of the original books. And in that book, you also travel to Atlantis. But in my book, Atlantis is a very different place. You're sort of trying to escape Atlantis this time.
So talk to us a bit about that. Like, how is it relatable to Journey Under the Sea? What are some of the connections that those that remember Journey Under the Sea, how they see some connections to your book?
Sure. Well, there are definitely a lot of Easter eggs for those people who will read or have read Journey Under the Sea. You'll notice some of the same scuba gear is in the book. You actually find sort of evidence of an exploration that may have happened many, many years ago, because my book is set from sort of 2050 to 2080. So the Seeker, which is the name of the scuba that you use in Journey Under the Sea, makes multiple appearances, as does the diving gear. And I won't say much because I don't want to give anything away, but it's a very good thing when you find the Seeker or when you find some old diving gear from Journey Under the Sea, because it kind of leads you into a very unexpected adventure.
But the reader is going through the narrative of an actual mermaid, though, correct?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So you kind of play a character called Neruvid, but everyone in the book calls them Neru. And you are a Merzood, which means you're part of the kind of more rebellious group of mer people who took down Atlantis, because the ruler of Atlantis is very corrupt. And the premise of the book is that you are a seeker, which means that you're very good at finding things and you're very good at fashioning tools and kind of magic talisman-like objects out of wreckage that you find throughout the ocean. You are very, very close to Rockaway Beach, which is quite a well-known beach in Brooklyn. And so off the coast of Brooklyn, you are investigating a yacht that is sunk. And when you go home, your house has been invaded by Atlantean guards and you get arrested. You are brought to the king, and the king says, okay, I'll let your family go as long as you can find this Atlantean treasure called the Eye. And the Eye is hidden in a lot of different places. There are a lot of faux eyes that appear throughout the book. And you realize through looking for the Eye that it has a lot of secrets that you didn't know about, that your family didn't know about, and that the king of Atlantis doesn't know about. So you can choose to use that to your advantage or not.
Wow. So really excited to talk about the choose your own adventure style. How different, other than the obvious aspects of it, but how different is it as a writer to write a branching narrative novel?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I would say there are a lot of similarities between writing branching interactive narratives and writing linear work. I think the main difference, of course, is that you have a map, and usually you map out all of the choices and all of the twists and the turns of the book before you start writing. I recommend that both to my students and to myself, because otherwise, or to any writer who's interested in getting into this kind of work, because if you don't map the book out before you start, you will be in trouble later on. Because if you start writing, the map just kind of keeps going and you'll never finish. Right. And I actually I went to grad school at Cal Arts, and I wrote a thesis that was a branching narrative piece. And I was really interested in exploring what it means to write a branching narrative book without starting with a map. And I don't think that map is ever going to be done. It's just going to keep expanding, which is totally great. You know, these books can be expansive. That's amazing. I feel like they should never be finished because there are always more choices to make. But for your sanity, I would suggest always mapping them out first. Okay. The similarities, I would say, I think the world building is really similar. You're creating a space that should have the capacity to keep going. You're creating characters that, whether or not the reader is inhabiting those characters, they should feel really full-bodied. They should feel very real. It should always feel like your readers have, like, you know, boots on the ground, so to speak. Right. I think also in, you know, Choose Your Own Adventure has a word limit and so you can't be you can't really be as descriptive with the environment as I think some other writers may be, which is great because it kind of challenges you to really create a world with not very few words, but fewer words. And, you know, that's a really, really fun challenge. But I think with novels or like linear short stories, you have the chance to kind of grow the environment by description. I think what's interesting about Choose Your Own Adventure, and this is maybe another way they differ, you can really grow the environment by allowing the reader to actively experience it. Mm. So it's that little bit of separation, right? It's a fourth wall break in theater talk.
Right. And so are they always need to be in first person, or can you do third person branching narratives as well?
I mean, you could do branching narrative in any person that you want. Right. I would say second person is most common because it places the reader in the action. Right. You do Choose Your Own Adventure requires a second person. Right. Second person work, which I think makes sense. I love writing in second person. It's really fun. I love how direct it is. Like, you are walking into the haunted house.
Do you feel like there's a formula that you have to do where you, as you map it out, that you have to throw in 10% of like abrupt endings, or 50% that you get a kind of a beginning, middle problem and abrupt end? Or like, how does that work from a formula perspective when you map it out?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I have a couple of rules that I follow. I think that it's really different for every writer. I tend towards horror doom endings, like scary negative endings, just because I think those are really fun to write, and those are my favorite ones to experience. I'm working toward having more positive endings in my book. Brooklyn Mermaid, because it's a classic Choose Your Own Adventure and not a Choose Your Own Nightmare, has much happier, more neutral endings. I also really love neutral endings because those are the endings that really make you want to dive back into the book. Happy endings satisfying endings kind of make you stop reading, I think. Linda Berry, the comic writer, has this really great quote about happy endings where she says, you know, we may not need the happy ending, but we're glad it's there. And I think in Choose Your Own Adventure books, you need probably about 30% happy endings. Because if you keep dying and keep dying, I mean, the reader gets discouraged, you know? So you have to sprinkle them in the right places. The other rule that I always follow is having a through line story. A lot of people call this a golden path, but I don't really believe that there should be one quote unquote complete story in your book. I think that, you know, all of the paths, if you're lucky, are all golden paths, right? But there should be an enduring, cohesive mission. So the mission in Brooklyn Mermaid is to find the eye. That's always what your mission is. You can find a lot of side quests for sure. There are lots of opportunities for side questing, but in the end, you have to find the eye. That's your quest, your main quest.
Yeah. And when you make a branching novel, is there also a certain formula that you should max out, or a minimum amount of page flips or a maximum amount of page flips that you need to keep in mind as well?
Yeah. I mean, I think it depends on how you're telling the story and what the story is. Usually I like to limit my sort of introduction, which is more of the linear part of the book, because you read through some pages to get background information on the world and on your character and to kind of set up the stakes. I would say probably keep that to no more than 6 pages. But again, you know, everybody does it differently. And I will say to any writers who are listening, anything that I'm saying, please feel free to subvert that, because these work for me. But it's really great when you hear a writer talking about a rule that they've made and you write something that just turns that right on its head. I always think that's really fun. Yeah.
So talk to us a little bit about the world building aspect of this. Now, how much freedom did you have? Because we talked about it, how it was a loose sequel to Journey Under the Sea and not a specific sequel. Now, how much freedom did you have to expand out that world?
Sure. Because the connections to Journey Under the Sea were really my idea. It wasn't really required that I make specific connections to the book. So when I say loose sequel, there are definitely some Easter eggs and there are definitely some objects that were used in that book. But in terms of plot structure and in terms of who you're playing as the character, the books are really different. And I mean, there are so many amazing things about working for Choose Your Own Adventure, Choose Co. I would say one of my favorite things is the amount of freedom that they give you to build the world. I mean, I have a bunch of exercises that I do both by myself in my own work and then also with my students that kind of help you tell the story that your imagination wants to tell. These are mostly collaborative exercises, so they're really fun. And they help you find things that are deeply surprising and really exciting. And I think when the work is really surprising and exciting, then the product, or, you know, the work that comes from it has the same kind of exciting, thrilling aspects to it. So Choose Co allowed me to really build a world from the ground up. And that's what I did. I created illustrations. I mapped out the book, I think, gosh, maybe about 10 to 12 times in different shapes. Some of the maps, I wanted them to look like fish. Some of them I wanted to look like an eye. Some of them I wanted to look like a heart for a while. And I think what we found was the product of a lot of experimentation and a lot of support from them, because, you know, the editors and the world builders at Choose Co are amazing and really excellent. And they have this incredible catalog of books and kind of dreamlike spaces. It's so cool.
Well, hey there. If you're enjoying our podcast, don't forget to subscribe on YouTube or leave us a 5-star review on your favorite podcast platform. Your support means the world to us and helps us keep this show going. We love hearing from you, so any feedback is welcome. And thank you for being a part of our podcast family and for all your support. It truly means a lot to us. So you mentioned before about, as we were talking earlier, about world building and also making out a map. what would be your advice for someone who says, I want to tell a story in this in a world, but I want to create the world first? Is there a point where you say, listen, slow down, like is there a point of advice or through your teaching to say, these are the skeletal things that you need to have if you're going to start telling a story inside of a world?
I would say my big rule, and I have very few rules, and I would say that mostly those rules are made to be broken, honestly, because it's world building, but I would say that the way that my most successful experiences with world building, and I think the most fun I've had with world building is when I world build just the world, and I don't think about it being a choose your own adventure book. I don't think about it being like a virtual reality experience. I don't think about it being a haunted house or an immersive experience. I just build the world, and then I see what it can become. And that's what I tell my students a lot, because I think, a lot of my students at Columbia are film students, and the way that we teach world building and teach a lot of creativity is like a means to an end. Like we'll have this world building session, but then like, what do we get out of it? And what you get out of it is the experience of world building. Just because you don't have a product at the end of it doesn't mean that you failed in any way. You have the world, So world building doesn't have to stop once the piece is over. You can build a world and pull an untold number of projects out of it.
Right. Now, what would be, as you mentioned earlier too, what is your definition of world building?
Gosh. So my definition of world building would be, world building is the act of creating an inhabitable, imaginative space.
How does that correspond with interactive media?
Great question. So I think interactive media is essentially participatory storytelling, right? It's a collaborative effort between the designers who are making an experience and the participants who are stepping through the experience. So the big question with world building in that scenario is, how do we create an environment and that can tell a narrative, right? Like, what's environmental storytelling? There are so many examples that have great environmental storytelling. I think my favorite environmental storytelling piece is probably BioShock, because the world in that game tells you so much about it. The color, the space, the lighting. I mean, it's super, super cinematic. And cinema is film is like one of the greatest storytellers of all. That world building is really about, how can I create a world, and then how can I create an experience of that world that lets someone or groups of people discover the world, maybe in the same way that I did, but discover the world in a way that feels like a story. So you can world build infinitely, of course. But when you're thinking about an interactive experience, let's take a virtual reality experience, for instance, or let's take an interactive display. You're at a festival, you have an interactive display. Everything in that space, whether it's for a single participant or for a group of participants, everything in that space should tell part of the story. For instance, there's Meow Wolf, which has incredible art installations all over the country. Each of those different spaces has a story of its own. And if you really walk through all of the different kind of gallery spaces that are connected, you can find this amazing interconnected story that happens. I think what's amazing about world building and interactive media is that you have the opportunity to have people collaboratively discover a world. And if you can figure that out, you're good, you're golden. Right. I mean, if you can figure out how to build a world that people can collaborate in and have a connection to, I mean, that's incredible storytelling.
And so how would you do something along the lines where because interactive media and world building, you need an audience in that sense. You need a receiver of that, or someone that interacts with it. How do you define the passive agreement the artist or the storyteller has with the audience. So how do you create that?
It sounds like what you're talking about is trust, right?
Hmm.
Like, how do you win an audience's trust?
Right.
There are a lot of different ways to do that. When I was working in haunted houses, we would make people sign a waiver. And so, so that's one way to do it. The other way to do it, I think, is to have them bring something of themselves into the project. You know, either have them share something about themselves, have them bring an object from their home and have it somehow transfer into the virtual world so that it feels like there's a part of them in it. Because I think what happens in storytelling sometimes is that you, the participant, are moving through a story that's unfolding in front of you, but you don't see a trace of yourself in it. And usually in every other environment that we experience, us being physically in a space shifts the space. And I think interactive storytelling should be the same way, where there should always be a trace of the participants in the story.
It almost too is like is as the point is that you're talking about something that's either active participation and passive participation, meaning passive participation is if you're watching a TV show, the TV show is going to still run even if you're outside the room. Active participation, like a book, the book isn't going to read itself.
Yeah.
You have to actually read the book in order for the entertainment to happen. So are you suggesting also interactive media is almost a marriage between passive and active entertainment in a way?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I would say it totally depends on the participant, because I've gone through, like, take Sleep No More, for example. That's a show by Punch Drunk that's been in New York since 2012. And basically it's a very kind of loose retelling of Macbeth. And you are set loose with a mask on through the McKittrick Hotel. And the performance is done by a huge cast of very talented actors and movement artists. And you walk through this enormous hotel, either by yourself or with friends, in groups of about 20 to 80 people, and you follow characters around and learn their stories. You could be a very passive observer in that, and you would still have a great time because you could just stand in one room and never explore the hotel, and you could people watch, and you could watch characters run through, or you could be an incredibly active observer and you could follow specific characters and you could run through the entire building, right? I think it's really, really important that we create accessible experiences for different personality types. Experiences like that can ask you to be brave. I mean, Choose Your Own Adventure books often ask you to be very brave or very foolish, depending on what part of the book you're reading. But in terms of passive and active involvement, I think definitely building for people who want to be more kind of in the background and watch versus people who really want to get in on the show, and everybody in the middle, you know, because they're different shades of every participant. I agree with you totally that I think it's important to design for all of those different participant. Yeah.
So for those that might be listening that are storytellers and authors themselves, and they could be hearing this and thinking, wow, I got a great story, but I'm a little intimidated by the idea of interactive media, what would be your advice to them?
Oh, I mean, I would say I totally agree. And as someone in the industry, it's very intimidating. I mean, prototyping your work is simultaneously the most exciting and humiliating experience ever because you get in a room full of people with something that you think is absolutely going to work, and then it totally breaks. And you learn so much about how people interact, and you learn to check all of your assumptions. And I've been doing this, you know, for a while, and I'm still wrong all the time. Even especially the things I'm sure about. It's always the things I'm sure about or the things I don't think about, because my assumption is that people will walk over there if I do this. Nobody walks over there, you know? Or like nobody stands on the red circle when I want them to. I would say that everything in art is intimidating. Everything in writing is intimidating. If you're a writer and you write most days and you're showing your work to other people, you're already in an amazing place. And prototyping will feel strange at first, but the connections and the joy of kind of finding the core interactions in your piece will give you so much joy. It'll be really fun.
Right.
Even though, you know, your first prototype is going to suck. Mine always
do. And so how do you do that? So talking about from a logistics question a bit, when you write a branching novel or doing something along those interactive media, how do you get proofreading done in that sense? How does that work?
I do write a lot of instructional language, and sometimes I'm really good at it, and sometimes things are really clear. When I first started doing it, that was not the case. I would write things and believe that they were as clear as they can possibly be, and it would confuse every single person who stepped into the piece. This is when I was working with the Digital Storytelling Lab. I'm still working with the Digital Storytelling Lab at Columbia, but I started working with them on Zoom during the pandemic, and we were making a virtual kind of haunted house / experience of falling into a conspiratorial rabbit hole called Project Immerse. And we did the onboarding section, which is the section of the experience that kind of teaches you how to grapple with the platform, which is called Miro, which is it's a collaborative whiteboarding space, usually used for, I think, probably virtual corporate meetings, but we use it for narrative and storytelling. So we had to figure out how to get them to be comfortable with those tools, and also figure out how to get them to be comfortable with some conceptual ideas in the piece. So that's what the onboarding section does. Okay. And I think I worked on that for about 6 months. When we bring the piece out and we show it to other people, I still find little things that I need to tweak. So very much like mapping choose your own adventure books in advance, I would say the onboarding section, or like the intro section to your interactive experience, is the most important part, because that lays the foundation for your participants to just like leap into your world, right? You want it to feel easy. You want it to feel exciting. You want them to feel enchanted and curious. And that's the most important part. That's like the mapping of the whole piece, you know?
Right. So talk to us a bit about some examples of things that you mentioned earlier about haunted houses. What other levels of interactive media that you're really proud to talk about?
Oh yeah, sure. I mean, I love haunted houses so much. I used to work at Blackout, which was this amazing haunted house that was based in New York and Chicago and Los Angeles. And we did a very kind of stripped down version of a haunted house. So it wasn't like jump scare spooky. Performers wouldn't really wear any makeup, and you would just be with people. Which sometimes is the scariest thing of all, especially if those people are playing horrible characters. One of our favorite things that we did is we would just like leave you in a totally dark room for a long time, and it was really scary. So it was really simple but very effective. And I worked for them for about 5 years and loved it. And it was great. It was great. I was a performer and a manager and a set designer, and I helped them design some of the rooms. So I went full in on Blackout. It was great. I'm very proud of 8th Grade Witch, which was the Choose Your Own Adventure book that I wrote, the first one that I wrote. It was adapted into a graphic novel. There was also a really wonderful piece that I did with 2 of my friends, Naf El-Jawasir and Nitsan Bartov, called Alexa Call Mom, where we used Alexa as a conversational AI tool. So we basically hacked her, because she's not a conversational tool at all. She's just a voice assistant that does whatever you ask her to do. And we used her as a medium to contact the Beyond, which was a satirical Amazon space where if your loved ones are Amazon Prime members, their consciousness gets uploaded to the Beyond and you're able to speak to them after they pass on. So that was a really fun piece. And one of my favorite projects that I worked on was a piece called Interactive Adventures that I did while I was at CalArts that was all about bringing interactive healing and therapy and meditation exercises to pediatric chemo patients at CHLA, which is a children's hospital in LA. And we made 2 really exciting interactive adventures using puppets, using Mad Libs. And that was awesome. That was awesome. And that's actually not listed on my website. But this one here at the bottom called Unsung was also a really, really cool project done with Movers and Shakers, which is an amazing, amazing group based in New York. I did a lot of puzzle creation for them, which I don't get to do that often, and I really love it. But basically it was, it's an educational tool that kind of expands the dialogue around the civil rights movement, and you get to experience the lives of 2 amazing artists. And it's all augmented reality, which is great. And Mika Milner, he paints in VR using Tilt Brush, I think. And so he created all of these incredible, like beautiful monuments of history, which was awesome. Yeah. And the projects that I work on with the DSL, I also really love. We're working on one right now called Blockchain Fairy Tales that we've taken to a few festivals. And it's taking the ideas that are around cryptocurrency and decentralized autonomous organizations, which are organizations that have no leader, intensely democratic in that way. And we're taking those like formal ideas and trying to create collaborative storytelling exercises around them that are all about climate change. So it's all about kind of creating creatures and new myths for the next generation that also act as, a way to talk about climate change that feels productive and doesn't send you spiraling into like a grief chasm.
So as an artist and a storyteller, how much responsibility do you feel that you do need to add some level of education to your stories?
I had a lot of different experiences with school. Some of it I really loved, some of it I hated so much. It's part of the reason I teach now. And so I don't know, I love learning, and I love kind of curious readers and students who are excited to kind of go to unknown places with their work and in their minds. And so I think having, I think Brooklyn Mermaid has a lot of sort of STEM parts of it, but I think learning is one of the easiest ways to immerse people, because part of what's so great about immersion is that hopefully it leads to some kind of transformation after you're done with the experience. And I think learning is a really positive way of finding that. So educational aspects are very important for me. Yes.
Right. So what's next for you, Shar?
I am working on a project right now about sleep paralysis, which is this scary thing that happens when you kind of wake up, but you're still having a dream and you can't move your body. I had a period of my life for about 2 years where that constantly happened to me every night. And I've been a little afraid of working on anything about it until now. But I'm working on an interactive installation that kind of gives participants the same feeling as that. And I'm working on a story around that. There's a lot going on at the Columbia Digital Storytelling Lab. And if anyone is interested in experimenting with new forms and functions of storytelling, we are an open prototyping community. And we accept everyone. So please come and join our test break sessions. Barney, you're more than welcome to come too. It'd be really fun to have you.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, of course. And I'm also working on another children's book right now about a coffin that's very bored underground. So that'll come out eventually.
That's awesome. And so if people want to find you, what's the best place they could find you at?
The best place to find me is at sharsimp.com. So C.E. Simpson is my pen name. So it's sharsimp.com. And you can contact me there, and we can talk a little shop. Yeah.
Excellent.